Follow at Radyo Katipunan in our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. Follow at Radyo Katipunan in our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter.
JCCICSI Music Ministry, your daily dose of inspiration. Follow JCCICSI PH on Spotify and JCCICSI Music on YouTube. We are also on iTunes and Deezer.
Calling on all young male professionals. Do you wish to live an extraordinary life? Are you tired of the routine and mundane and long for a dynamic, adventurous, and even dangerous life? Do you wish to make your life count and hope to make an impact long after you're gone? Do you wish to live a life of service to society, to country, and to dear Mother Earth? Then you are the one we are looking for. Consider the Society of Jesus. Join the church's gallant army and turn your world upside down. Call the Jesuits Vocations Promotions Team 426-6101, local 3406. Once again, 426-6101, local 3406.
Get your daily dose of inspiration through our music. Follow JCCICSI PH on Spotify and JCCICSI Music in YouTube.
Have you ever wondered how our blue eaglets are formed by the Ateneo? How they learn to take their first step, run, and fly? Join Batang Atinista as Jerome Garcia, Jeff Velasco, and Jenny Salvania, otherwise known as the Team JJJ of the Ateneo Grade School, share with us how the Ateneo is starting them young. Batang Atinista. Only here at Radyo Katipunan, 87.9 FM.
The time has come when we can fly and spread our wings against the sky.
Tara na't simulan ng inyong umaga sa mga magagandang refleksyon tungkol sa ating buhay at pananampalataya. Kasama sina Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle ng Manila, Father J. Boy Gonzales at Father Nono Alfonso ng Kapisanan ni Jesus, Father Cali Llamado ng Manila Cathedral, at Binibining Risa Singson Kaupeng ng Light of Jesus Community dito sa Kapit Pandasal sa Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM.
Sa unti-unting pagbubukas ng mga simbahan muli para sa banal na misa, may mahalagang paalala sa atin si Pope Francis. Let us return to the Eucharist with joy. Masaya tayong makapagsisimba muli. Ito po si Father Cali mula dito sa Manila Cathedral. Halina po at magkapet pandasal. Marami na sa ating mga simbahan ang nagbubukas muli para makadalo na sa banal na misa ang mga tao. Bagaman naroon pa rin ang maigting na pag-iingat para sa pagsisimba, sabi ni Pope Francis, hindi dapat ito magdulot ng pangamba at takot, kundi ang banal na misa ay magdulot dapat ng kagalakan sa kalooban, na magkakasama-sama na tayong muli bilang isang pamayanan at tatanggapin na natin si Kristo sa kanyang katawan na nagbibigay lakas. Kung tayo ay susunod sa mga alituntunin ng safety protocols, tiyak na magiging ligtas, masaya at banal ang ating pagsisimba muli. At napakaganda rin ang paalala ni Pope Francis. Sabi niya, kung isa ka sa mga nakapagsimba na muli, tandaan, dalhin mo naman ang biyayang natanggap sa kapwa. Sa loob ng misa, natanggap natin ang biyaya ng salita ng Diyos, ang biyaya ng kanyang banal na katawan, ang biyaya ng pagkakaisa ng komunidad. Lahat ng mga biyayang ito ay dalhin mo at ibahagi sa pamilya at sa kapwa. Hindi ba't masaya ulit na makapagsimba, tumanggap ng biyaya at magiging daluyan ka ng biyaya? Panginoon, salamat po sa biyaya ng banal na misa. Masaya po ulit kaming magsisimba. Amen.
Radyo Katipunan. News, insights, inspiration. Radyo Katipunan. Down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle. The voice of the Blue Eagle. Radyo Katipunan 87.9.
Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay atin sa loob, sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng eskwela. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero sugod. Todo sa kayod, tunong at tulong. Lipad na Blue Eagle, galing giting at tigil. Blue and white, one big fight. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan.
The Jesuit Hour. Get to know the Jesuits. Discover their spirituality, their history, their ministries. The Jesuit Hour. Anything Jesuit, everything Jesuit. The Jesuit Hour.
Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga sa lahat. Again, this is Manuel from the Simbahang Lingkod Bayan, officially welcoming you to See Judge Act, an analysis of social issues and discernment on action guided by the Catholic social teaching. On behalf of SLB and the JJCICSI, we are very blessed and very thankful that you were able to make time this morning to join us for our national situationer and discussion on the church response. And we are looking forward to a fruitful morning with everyone. For those who have friends who also want to listen and join in the presentations, our video is being live streamed on Facebook, on the Facebook pages of the John Jack Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues, and on the Facebook page of the Simbahang Lingkod Bayan. For everyone here, we are thankful again that you have made time to join us today as we try to further look more critically at the situation of our country and understand and look at different ways of understanding what it is that we are facing today. Important also to this morning's conversation is the role of the church. Many of the participants this morning are members of different congregations, different faith communities and institutions, and we hope later on to jumpstart deeper conversations that will look more closely into how the church can further situate itself and respond to the very turbulent situation that we find ourselves um, facing this day. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to ask that we move to the next slide so I can just present some ground rules for all of our participants. Just three very simple rules. Firstly, that we are hoping to create a safe space. Especially later during our spiritual conversations, we are looking to be able to explore the questions that each of us have brought to the table and to learn from each other's perspectives. That means that we are hoping that all can be given a chance to speak, and when given a chance to speak, are given due respect when people are listening to one another and responding and building off from each other's points. The second and third reminders are technical reminders. The second one is our audio reminder. Please do turn off your microphones or mute your sound systems while others are presenting or speaking. For those who are unfamiliar with Zoom, this can be found on the lower left corner of the desktop screen, where you will see a microphone icon with the word mute. You can simply click this icon and it will mute your system for you. Our officers will also be muting the computer systems of those who might need help. So please just message in the chat if you will need assistance in muting your system. Lastly, we do not require everyone to have their videos on through the entire session, but please do turn on your videos during the reactors presentations. We have two special reactors who will be sharing their perspectives on the national situation represented and on the situation also of the church. And we'd like to ask that everyone turn on their videos during that session. We also ask that people turn on their videos during the breakout groups so that we can create a more authentic conversation. However, if you are uncomfortable or if you feel that it is not safe to have your videos on, you can always choose to leave them off. We can go to the next slide, please. The C-Judge Act is a national situation represented by two organizations. The first organization, next slide, is the John Jack Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues, which is an organization and community of researchers and advocates committed to a faith that does justice, which works in solidarity with various sectors in order to respond to issues and concerns of the poor. Again, our video is live streamed on their page, so we can check that and share that with our friends who would like to participate also in the conversation. The second organization that is taking part in this event, this morning's event, is the Simbahang Lingkod Bayan, which is the socio-political apostolate of the Society of Jesus here in the Philippines, a faith-based nonprofit organization committed to a mission of spreading social justice through its political education campaigns, socio-political advocacy, and disaster response and rehabilitation work. These two organizations have worked together to bring this event to you, and you can check their Facebook pages out or their websites out for further information about the respective organizations. As we start our morning session, I'd like to invite firstly everyone into a prayerful silence of gratitude for all that has been given to us and for courage for all that we are to face. This opening prayer is a video, and we'd like to please draw your attention to it.
Jesus na aking kapatid, sa lupa nami bumalik. Iyong mukha'y ibang iba, hindi kita nakikilala. Tulutan mo aking mata, mamulat sa katotohanan. Ikaw poon makikilala sa taong mapagkumbaba. Jesus na aking kapatid, Pawisan man ang iyong sapin, patong-patong iyong damit, iyong mukha'y nakatakip din. Tulutan mong aking mata, mamulat sa katotohanan, ikaw po ang makikilala sa taong mapagkumbaba. Jesus na aking kapatid, ililingap ang may sakit, hindi man lang makaidlip, buhay mo man ang kapalit. Tulutan mo aking mata, mamulat sa katotohanan, ikaw poon makikilala sa taong mapagkumbaba. Jesus na aking kapatid, pagod mo ay hindi batid. Alam ko ang pananabik, sa tahanay makabalik. Tulutan mo aking mata, mamulat sa katotohanan, ikaw poon makikilala sa taong mapagkumbaba. Jesus na aking kapatid, sa dukha'y nagmamalasakit, at sa kasagaling naman, maghapon ka nang nagbabantay. Tulutan mo aking mata, mamulat sa katotohanan, ikaw poon makikilala, ikaw poon makikilala, ikaw poon makikilala sa taong mapagkumbaba. O aking kapatid, makita ka sa taong mapagkumbaba.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Once again, to those who have just joined us, we thank you for making time to join us this morning for C-Judge-Act, an analysis of social issues and discernment on action, guided by the Catholic social teaching. To formally start our event, we would like to invite forward Father Patrick Falguera from the Society of Jesus, the Executive Director of the Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan. So please direct your attention to Father Pat Falguera.
Isang mabiyayang umaga po sa kanilang lahat. Maraming salamat po sa paglalaan ng panahon ngayong umaga para makisamahan nyo kami. Si Judge Act, sa payak na salin, ito ay ang paanyayang pagtingin, pagsusuri at pagkilos. Ngunit sa aking palagay, higit pa rito ay ang hamon na manalangin, manindigan, makialam. Dahil sa pagmamahal natin sa Diyos, sa bayan, at sa simbahan, tinatawag tayong manalangin na may malawak na pagtingin. Tinatawag tayong manindigan pagkatapos ng malalim na pagsusuri. At huli, tinatawag tayong makialam na may mapagnilay na pagkilos. Alam niyo po, bahagi po tayo ng malawakang misyon ng ating Panginoon. At panalangin ko ngayong umaga na magiging mabiyaya po ang mangyayari ang talakayan para mapaghandaan at baguhin sa mabiyayang paraan ang kinabukasan ng ating lipunan, ng ating simbahan, at ng ating bayan. Uli, mabiyayang umaga po sa kanilang lahat at maraming salamat po sa pagtangkilik sa inyong oras ngayong umaga.
Maraming salamat, Father Pat. Thank you for joining us also and officially starting our session for today. For the flow of this presentation, for those who are just joined us, we will be having two major presentations. First, a discussion and analysis on issues that we are facing today, and later on, discussion and sharing of insights that we can consider as we try to further discern and reflect upon the position and role of the church amidst all of these issues. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the National Situationer to be presented by Dr. Jing Caraos from the John Jack Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues.
Good morning, magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Pinamagatan ko ang aking pagbabahagi tungkol sa pambansang kalagayan natin na walang iisang kwento. At magiging malinaw siguro ito sa pagtutuloy ko sa aking presentation. Bago ako tumuloy, gusto kong ipaalam sa inyo na ang aming organisasyon, ang John Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues, ay merong isang publication na matatagpuan sa kanyang website, kaya nakalagay dito yan, yung JJCICSI.org.ph, kung saan pinamagatan namin itong Lights and Shadows at aming sinusuri ang performance ng Duterte administration, ng kasalukuyang pamahalaan sa pamamagitan ng Catholic social principles na batay sa mga tinuturo ng ating simbahan. Maraming datos dito, maraming impormasyon kayong makukuha tungkol sa mga nagaganap sa ating bayan kasi hindi ko kayang talakayin silang lahat. Mas maganda dito, makikita ninyo meron din konting pagsusuri na tinitingnan nga kung itong isang bagay ba na ito, isang sitwasyon ba ito ay isang light o isang medyo magandang pangyayari o kaya isang shadow na hindi masyadong kagandahan. So, hinihikayat ko po kayo na bisitahin niyo po ang aming website. Magsisimula po ako sa tatlong kwento tungkol sa pandemya. Kadalasan ang ating pagtalakay sa pambansang kalagayan ay pinagkukwentuhan natin ang mga ginagawa ng gobyerno. Mga polisiya, mga pagkilos ng gobyerno o kaya ng mga politiko. Pero bihira na tinutuon natin ang ating pansin sa mga tao. Kaya naisip ko na maganda siguro na sa pagtalakay natin sa pambansang kalagayan, pagtuunan naman natin ang pansin ang mga ordinaryong Pilipino at kung ano ang sinasabi nito tungkol sa sino tayo. Madalas sinasabi na yung pandemya ay nagpakita daw sa atin o nag-expose sa atin ng marami sa mga problema ng ating lipunan tungkol sa malawak na kahirapan, tungkol sa uri ng pabahay ng maraming mga tao at ang kalagayan ng paninirahan nila na hindi makatao at tungkol sa kasalatan nila na wala silang access sa mga basic services, importante na dyan ang kalusugan. Marami tayong natuklasan tungkol sa kalagayan ng ating lipunan. Pero yung pagtuklas natin tungkol sa ating pagkasino, siguro maganda rin na bisitahin natin yan at tingnan natin dahil bahagi yan sa kwento ng ating pambansang kalagayan. Sino ba ang Pilipino? At meron akong tatlong kwento na nakuha ko ito mula sa pakikinig sa balita. Una, yung tungkol sa bata na naturuan ng kanyang ama kasi magkapatid sila, batang babae ito. Siguro narinig niyo itong kwento na ito at meron siyang mas nakakabatang kapatid na lalaki na naabutan ng tulong. Na isang bag ng mga siguro pagkain yon, tulong parang ayuda ng isang pribadong organisasyon. At pagkatapos siyang maabutan nito, parang mayroong nag-abot ng pangalawang bag sa kanya. At sinabihan siya nung ate, huwag mo nang tanggapin yan kasi meron ka na. At nung tinanong siya kung bakit niya sinaway ang kanyang kapatid na nakababata, sabi niya yan ang turo ng kanyang ama. Tinuruan siya na kung meron na siyang sapat at may natanggap na siya, ay huwag na siyang tumanggap ng karagdagan sapagkat mayroong iba na mas nangangailangan nito. Napakagandang kwento na ang isang bata ay natuturuan ng kanyang magulang ng isang napaka-importanteng aral na tingnan ang pangangailangan ng kanilang kapwa. Ang ikalawang kwento naman tungkol sa isang lalaki na marunong siyang magkumpuni, mag-ayos ng mga sirang cellphone, mga sirang mga laptop, computer. At naisip niya na gamitin niya iyon para tulungan yung mga batang mag-aaral na mahihirap na walang gadget, no? Walang cellphone, hindi makakapag-online sa blended learning. Kaya nagpakalat siya sa social media ng advice na kung pwedeng padalhan siya ng mga sira, no? Ng mga cellphone at mga computer, laptop, at aayusin niya para ipagamit din sa mga bata, no? Mga kailangan nito sa kanilang pag-aaral. Isang pagpapakita na ang mga Pilipino, marami tayong talento, no? May mga kakayahan ang mga ordinaryong Pilipino. At handa silang gamitin ito hindi lamang para sa pansarili, kundi sa pagtulong sa kanilang kapwa, lalo na sa panahon ng pangangailangan. Ang pangatlong kwento ko naman tungkol ito sa mag-ina na meron silang tindahan. No? Hindi rin sila mayaman, no? Maliit lang yung tindahan. Mga negosyante sila, mag-ina sila, tindahan ng bisikleta. At merong isang matandang lalaki na panay-panay dumadalaw sa kanilang tindahan, tinatanong kung magkano yung isang bisikleta na gusto niyang bilhin. Subalit dahil hindi sapat yung kanyang pera, ay bumabalik na lamang siya. No? Kung kailan siguro nadadagdagan ng pera niya, tatanungin na naman niya kung magkano, siguro umaasa siya na merong mas murang bisikleta siyang mabibili. Saka babalik niya, finally, sumapat yung pera niya, bibilihin na niya yung bisikleta. Pero sinabi ng mag-ina, huwag niyo na pong bayaran yan, regalo na namin sa inyo, nag-ambagan kaming mag-anak para ibigay na lang sa inyo yung bisikleta at magamit ninyo sa inyong pagtatrabaho, kung saan man ninyo gustong pumunta para magpagamot. Kasi yun din ang dahilan, dahil nung panahon na nawalan ng public transport, hindi niya kayang maglakad patungo sa kanyang pagpapagamot. Muli, isang kwento ito na ang mga pamilyang Pilipino ay merong malasakit, no, sa kapwa nila na higit na nangangailangan. Mga kwento ito ng mga ordinaryong Pilipino na nagpapaalala sa atin kung sino ba tayo, no, sa gitna ng kahirapan, sa gitna ng kagipitan, kagaya ng nararanasan natin ngayon. Sige, tutuloy ko po sa iba't iba pang mga uri ng mga kwento at may tatlong uri ng kwento akong gustong pag-usapan. Una dito, mga bagong kwento tungkol sa pandemyang COVID-19 at paano tayo tumugon dito. Susunod ay parang mga bago sa balita pero hindi naman talaga totoong mga bagong mga kwento. At pangatlo, mga hindi nagbabagong kwento tungkol sa ating bayan. So una, yung mga nangyari na may kinalaman sa COVID, ito ay tungkol sa mga pagresponde, no? Yung pagtugon ng ating gobyerno sa COVID, at mahahati natin sa dalawang bahagi. Dun sa public health side, no, para kontrolin yung pagkalat ng pandemya, tayo yung nagpatupad ng isang napakahabang lockdown, no? Kasi talagang mas yun ang pinigil ng gobyerno natin, yung pagkilos ng mga tao. No? Mas nag-focus tayo sa public, naging mabagal at parang hindi, sa tingin ng marami, hindi pinagtuunan yung mga dapat na pagtuunan. Halimbawa, yun nga, mas natuon dun sa sasaway sa mga pasaway, no? Para sumunod sila dun sa mga health protocols. Pero hindi sapat ang naging atensyon na ibinigay sa napaka-importanting mga gawain tulad ng malawakang testing, yung contact tracing, yung pag-isolate ng mga taong positibo na sa COVID-19 at yung pagpapagamot sa kanila. Halimbawa, si Mayor Magalong, no, na kinuha nga siya para siya yung tumulong sa contact tracing dito sa Kamaynilaan. Sabi niya, ang dapat na ratio ng isang infected individual sa mga contacts ay dapat 1:37 kasi yun yung naging epektibo sa Baguio. Pero tayo ngayon ay nag-average lang daw ng 1:5. So mga 5 contacts lamang ang natitrace. Hindi talaga yun sumasapat. At itong pagtuon sa contact tracing nangyari lang nitong nakaraang 2 buwan. Sa makatwid, maraming panahon ang lumipas na hindi pinagtuunan ang contact tracing samantalang ito ay isang importanteng susi para mapigilan nga ang pagkalat ng pandemya. Pati yung isolation, ngayon na lang sinasabi na hindi pala sapat ang home quarantine. No? Kailangan talagang ilagay sa mga isolation facilities, lalo na yung mga kababayan natin na nasa mga masisikip na mga kabahayan. So itong napaka-importanting 4 na gawain na to, yung broad-based testing, tracing, isolation, and treatment, hindi natutukan ng mabuti. Pati na rin yung pagpapalakas ng healthcare system. Halimbawa yung mga health workers, alam na kulang tayo sa health workers pero hindi tayo naglaan ng sapat na pera, resources para makapag-hire, no? ng karagdagang health workers at mabigyan sila ng maayos na sweldo. Ang koordinasyon din sa pagitan ng mga public hospitals and private hospitals hindi naging maayos, kulang ang mga PPEs, at hindi nagamit na maximize ang information technology para sana magamit dito sa mga sa distribution ng social protection, assistance, at saka importante lalo sa contact tracing. Pagdating naman dun sa pag-ayuda, yun nga yung Social Amelioration Program, nagpagulong ang gobyerno ng isang Social Amelioration Program, pero maraming naging problema dito. Una, kakulangan. Yung mga taong dapat sanang tumanggap, marami sa kanila hindi nakasama sa listahan dahil wala tayong maayos na listahan simula pa. Ang maayos lang natin na listahan ay yung sa 4Ps, pero maliban sa 4Ps, marami pang mga pamilya na mangangailangan sana ng tulong dahil nawalan ng ng trabaho, pero wala sila sa listahan. Walang paraan para mailista sila, no? Kulang-kulang kung tayo ay magde-depend lamang sa local governments. Ang second tranche ng Social Amelioration Program, marami ay hindi pa nakakatanggap at medyo nagkakaroon din ng problema sa pagdidistribute nito. Sa makatuwid, hindi talaga naayos ng mabuti ang paraan ng pagbibigay ng ayuda. Tumugon ng gobyerno, mayroong budget na ipinasa yung Bayanihan 1, karamihan nga ng social amelioration sa Bayanihan 1. Sa Bayanihan 2 naman, yung stimulus package, may konting stimulus doon para sa mga small and medium enterprises at saka sa turismo, no, para ito ang unti-unting magdala ng recovery. May konti pa rin na social amelioration. Pero sa 2021 national budget ay wala na raw social amelioration sapagkat regular budget na lang ng DSWD at ang mga local governments na lang ang inaasahan na tumulong magbigay ng ayuda sa mga tao. Inaasahan kasi na meron ng konti, kahit konti na economic recovery. Pero maraming po na dyan sa national budget na yan na mas maliit, bagamat dinagdagan ang budget, for example, for health and education na mahalaga, hindi sapat yung pagdagdag ng pondo sa kanila. Hindi kasing laki ng pondo na ibinibigay sa ibang sektor kagaya ng infrastructure. At meron pa nga isang questionable item, yung tinatawag na, yung ibinigay sa National Task Force for Ending Local Communist Armed Conflict, na ngayon, bago ko nga lang nalaman na meron palang National Task Force na ganun, na binigyan ng 16 billion na pondo for local projects na although supposedly development projects ito na inaaprubahan daw ng mga barangay, pinangangambahan na ito ay gagamitin for political purposes for the 2022 election. So maraming mga kakulangan, no, dun sa budget na ihanda dahil ang emphasis ay parang hindi masyado doon sa pagtulong sa mga tao in terms of the basic services, no, health, particularly health and education, and stimulating the economy to create jobs. Nitong nakaraang pandemya, mayroong mga tinatadyaang 30 million jobs lost, no? In addition to the more or less another 13 million na talagang unemployed na even before the pandemic. So nadagdagan pa yung mga unemployed natin dahil may mga nawalan ng trabaho. Marami rin ang nagutom, no? 4.2 million families experience involuntary hunger, of which 700,000 families suffered severe hunger. Ibig sabihin mas madalas na pagkagutom or tuloy-tuloy na kakulangan ng pagkain for these 700,000 families. So i-multiply nyo by 5 yan, that's about 3.5 million people. Yung 4.2 million families multiplied by 5, then about 20 million lahat yan na nakaranas ng gutom. Sa edukasyon, talagang bumaba ang private school enrollment, no, in basic education. Tinatansyang about 40% lumipat, no, from private schools dahil hindi na makayanan ng mga magulang because of the job losses. Marami ang nawalan ng trabaho and they would rather spend on other things, no. Kaya inilipat ang mga estudyante sa public schools, pero alam natin ang resources ng public school system natin ay kulang na nga to begin with, no. Tapos lalo pang magkukulang. May isang kinapanayam the other day at sinasabi na baka ang ratio na ngayon ng mga teachers to students in some public schools umabot sa 1:70. Napakarami no, 70 students no, sa isang teacher. Hindi ka agad makapagdagdag sa mga pag-hire ng mga teachers. Kulang din ang pondo na inilaan, no, sa ating 2021 budget para sa schools for teachers and also for facilities and for infrastructure, no, yung mga gagamitin, no, para sa online blended learning. So malaki ang kakulangan at napakalaki ng implikasyon nito para sa human development ng ating mga kabataan. So expectedly, poverty incidence will increase especially in urban areas. Pero sabi ng NEDA, hindi naman daw ito pang matagalan, temporary lang, sana nga, no, hanggang ang ekonomiya ay makabalik, no, at makabalik sa trabaho din ang maraming tao. And we have reports that domestic violence has increased also in urban areas dahil nga nananatili sa loob ng bahay ang mga tao, physical abuse sa mga bata at sa mga kababaihan ay maaring tumaas din. So yan ang ilan lamang sa mga bagong kwento na naranasan natin dahil sa pandemya ng COVID-19. Maliban sa kanila, may iba pang mga kwento na bago naman sa balita, pero hindi naman sila talaga mga bagong kwento. Anong halimbawa nito? Halimbawa, ang mga karahasan sa mahihirap. Patuloy pa rin ang pagtrato sa mga mahihirap na hindi lang second class, baka third class citizens. No? Halimbawa, eviction ay tuloy-tuloy. Ito ay larawan ng isang eviction sa Cabuyao, Laguna dahil sa isang infrastructure project. Kailangan ilikas ang mga tao, hindi man lang maipagpaliban dahil sa pandemya para hindi na makadagdag dun sa kahirapan na nararanasan na ng mga tao. Alam natin ang extrajudicial killings ay patuloy pa rin. In fact, isang human rights group ay nagsabi na tumaas pa nga. For example, in the 4 months from April to July, nakapagtala sila ng 155 drug-related EJ case compared to only about 120 nung December to March, no, before the lockdown. So dahil sa lockdown, parang naging mas vulnerable pa nga daw ang mga mahihirap sa extrajudicial killings kasi nakapirmi sila dun sa mga bahay nila at madali silang matatagpuan. Maliban dito yung corruption. So of course the most infamous case yung sa PhilHealth na nagulantang tayo na ganun kalaki, bilyones ang nawawala sa pondo ng PhilHealth dahil sa mga hindi tamang, no, pag-disburse at pag-reimburse sa ilang mga ospital. At yung sa Bucor, yung pagpapalabas ng mga inmates na high-profile inmates na hindi sigurado kung talaga bang namatay sila o pinawalan lang. So mga allegations of corruption yan. And then the attacks on press freedom. Hindi lang press freedom, kundi yung rule of law natin at weaponization ng mga institutions. Ang mga halimbawa nito ang nangyari sa pagtanggal ng prangkisa o hindi pag-renew ng prangkisa sa ABS-CBN sa kabila ng mga testimonies ng ating mga government officials na wala namang mabigat na violations na ginawa ang network, at ang pag-convict kay Maria Ressa at yung isang kasama niyang journalist, no, sa isang cyber libel case. No? At alam natin ang ABS-CBN at ang Rappler ay dalawa sa mga independent media na maaasahan ng mga tao para sa tamang impormasyon na kung minsan ay nagiging critical sila sa kanilang, dahil nga independent media sila, subalit sila ngayon ay kumbaga parang pinipigilan ngayon. Walang ABS-CBN, talagang nawala na. Ilan pa rin sa mga paulit-ulit na mga kwento na matagal na to na narinig na natin, hindi bago, yung revolutionary government, mabuti na lang hindi ito nagpatuloy. At ang sinasabing dahilan dito ay yung charter change, no, pagbabago sa konstitusyon para sa isang federal na gobyerno. Nababasa ng ilan na ito ay, ang tinutukoy talaga dito ay para pigilan ang constitutional succession, kung may mangyari sa presidente, ang vice-presidente ang mamumuno sa atin. No? Pero palagi ito, no? Paulit-ulit siya at kamakailan ay meron na namang nagsusulong nito. Ang anti-terrorism law, medyo bago siya, subalit ang mga killings ng mga activists ay hindi na ito bago. No? Matagal na itong nangyayari, pero kahit ngayon sa panahon ng pandemya, ay tuloy-tuloy sila. Of course, yung pinaka-nalaman natin, yung kay Randy Echanis at saka yung marami sila na mga magsasaka, leader manggagawa, na napatay nitong mga nakaraang ilang buwan. Matagal na rin na nangyayari yung parang yung napabayaan, no? Ang Marawi, ang rehabilitation ng Marawi at ang BARM, ang Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, na bagamat ito ay naging batas, ay hindi naman talaga nakakapag-operationalize ng mabuti. Sinasabi nga ng Sulu Governor ay maraming mga positions dito ay hindi pa nalalagyan ng appointments ng mga tao, kaya hindi talaga sila makagawa ng kanilang trabaho. And even the Council of Leaders hindi daw nako-convene. So parang napapabayaan ilan sa mga mahalagang bagay na importante, no, para kung seryoso tayo para sa security, para mapigilan natin ang pagkalat ng extremism, no, especially sa parte na yan ng Mindanao, pero hindi nagagawa, no, napapabayaan. Paulit-ulit lang din ang kwentong ito. Sa panghuli, mga hindi nagbabagong kwento. No? Ano yung mga hindi na tuloy napapansin kasi hindi na sila headlines, pero talagang bahagi yan ng sitwasyon ng ating bansa na matagal na at parang hindi na babago. Ano yun? No, sa isa na kahit na ang yaman-yaman ng bansa natin in terms of natural resources and human resources, mga tao natin, ang kayamanan natin, maraming talento sila at mga kakayahan. Bakit nananatiling mataas ang kahirapan sa ating bansa at pati na rin yung hindi pagkakapantay-pantay? Ito ay isang kwentong hindi nagbabago. Talagang naandyan lang yan lagi at hindi na natin napapansin, pero yan ang isang malaking kwento. Ang oligarkiya, totoo, tama, may oligarkiya sa ating bayan, pero parang hindi naman talaga nababawasan ang kapangyarihan nila at ang paghawak nila sa ating ekonomiya. Political dynasties, dumadami pa rin, lumalakas palalo ang kanilang control, no, sa ating mga institusyon sa gobyerno. Hindi sila nababawasan. Nandyan pa rin sila, hindi nagbabago. Ang kahinaan ng ating mga institusyon at ang palagi na lang silang nagagamit, no, para sa mga pribadong interes. Kita natin yan sa ABS-CBN. At ang korupsyon, no, endemic na korupsyon na nakikita natin kung paano mga institusyon, gaya ng PhilHealth na nakita natin, no, na gagamitin talaga ang pondo para sa hindi natin alam kung bakit na nawawala ang pera. Dahil merong mga sinasabi nilang mafia daw na may kakutsaba din sa mga ospital o kung ano man ang dahilan. At tuloy-tuloy din ang environmental degradation, pagkasira ng ating kalikasan, pagkasira ng ating kapaligiran. Itong susunod na 4 o 5 slides ay hiniram ko at pinagamit naman ni Dr. Randy Tuanyo ng Economics Department ng Ateneo de Manila. Ginamit ko ito at gusto ko ito ipakita sa inyo sapagkat ito ang ilan sa mga ebidensya na yung sinasabi natin, yung sinasabi ko kanina, hindi nagbabagong kwento na kahirapan sa ating bansa sa kabila ng mukhang paglago naman ng ekonomiya. No? Halimbawa, simula ng taong 2002 hanggang sa kasalukuyan, nagsimula naman talaga yung pag-akyat ng economic indicators natin. Halimbawa sa GDP or Gross Domestic Product per capita. Makikita ninyo na simula beginning of the 2000, paakyat po tayo. We lost 2 decades before that, from the 1980s to 2000. So pero ibang kwento na yan. Yan yung kwento na ng Marcos, yung naiwan na economic impact ng Marcos dictatorship. So natagalan, 2 dekada bago tayo nakaahon ulit. Pero nung nakaahon na tayo, kahit na nakaahon na tayo, makikita po natin na ang poverty incidence sa ating bansa ay mixed pa rin. No? Maraming mga lugar sa ating bansa na between, for example, just 2006 to 2015, so that's about 10 years, na lumala pa ang poverty incidence in certain regions such as Eastern Visayas, Northern Mindanao, Soc-Sargen, at saka ARM, no? Yung pong may mga pulang boxes. And even in the prosperous regions like the NCR, Central Luzon at Calabarzon na medyo urbanized and mas may mga industries, although mababa ang poverty incidence, stagnant naman, hindi siya bumababa. Hindi siya bumababa. Ang medyo good news lang, may mga regions na bumababa. No? For example, sa CAR, sa Ilocos at Cagayan Valley, sa Bicol, Western Visayas, bumababa ang kanilang, and even Mimaropa, bumababa ang poverty incidence. Pero marami pa rin mga lugar na hindi bumababa ang poverty incidence. At sa overall sa Pilipinas, bagamat mayroong pagbaba, ito ay napakabagal. At ang isang tinutukoy na dahilan kung bakit ganito, dahil sa uri daw ng mga gawa, ng mga trabaho. Ang ekonomiya natin, kaya hindi masyadong sinatawag na nagtitrickle down, no? Yung growth, yung benefits of growth, ay sapagkat ang uri ng mga trabaho ng mga tao ay maliliit naman ang kanilang kinikita dito sa kanilang mga trabaho. Marami ay self-employed, marami ay sa services na hindi naman talaga permanente. No? Ang work, so maraming Pilipino ay tinatawag nating insecure, kaya nga naging usapin yung ENDO, yung contractualisasyon. Yan na yung parang nagiging kalakaran. There is high underemployment. Kasi nga sa services sector, ganyan, may trabaho ka ngayon, susunod na buwan, wala. Hindi yan permanente, hindi yan stable. And even agriculture, maski na marami ang nasa agriculture, alam natin na mababa rin naman ang kinikita ng mga nagtatrabaho sa agriculture. So ito po ang economic structure, no? Ang work structure ng ating ekonomiya, kung bakit hindi nga nakakaangat ang marami sa ating bansa, at makikita ito po yung mga social classes natin, ano, very poor, vulnerable, and then the economically secure, and then the upper middle class, economically secure, and the top class, no. At makikita po natin na bahagya lamang talaga na bumababa ang ating number or percentage, no, ng ating proportion of households na sa yung sinasabi nating poor and very poor. Ito po yan, yung mga nasa baba nitong linya na ito. At yung ating mga middle classes, ito sana, itong dalawang classes na ito, the economically secure, yung dilaw, at yung sa baba niya, yung gray or light blue na vulnerable, ay bahagya lang din, no, na hindi sila masyadong lumalaki, no, unlike other countries in Asia na mas mabilis ang pag-akyat ng kanilang middle classes, no, kagaya ng Thailand, di bali na yung Malaysia, dati na silang mataas, Vietnam and China na mabilis din ang pag-akyat ng kanilang middle classes, pero ang Pilipinas ay napakabagal ng pag-angat, no, ng kanyang middle classes, no. We have among the slowest growth in the region. At ito ay isang measure of economic inequality and mobility, no. Hindi masyadong umaangat. So kahit na napakaganda ng record na economic growth, hindi talaga bumababa sa karamihan ng mga tao, even the middle classes. Ito ay isang paglalarawan lamang ng tinatawag nating mga oligarkiya, kung tinatawag natin gano'n, na sila may control ng ating ekonomiya, the Ayala Group, SM Group, First Pacific Group, DMCI Group, no. So sila yung mga conglomerates natin. At ano-anong mga saan sila, no, sa finances, sa mining, services, sa retail trade, they're in construction, they are in real estate na tinatawag na rent rich, no. So ibig sabihin, hindi sila masyadong nagki-create ng bagong kayamanan, kundi pinapakinabangan na nila ang kayamanan na naipundar na ng iba. So rent rich. Kaya naman ang mga hanap buhay ay kaunti lang ang kinikita ng mga tao na employed in these enterprises. So the increase in the net worth of the 40 richest Filipinos amounted to 24% of the GDP growth in 2016. So kita natin ang laking porsyento talaga ang kontrolado nitong malalaking conglomerates. So pagkatapos po ng mga kwentong ito, ano na? So anong masasabi natin, no? Matapos na marinig natin itong mga kwentong ito. Una, ang masasabi ko, kaya nga nagsimula ako dun sa kwento ng ating mga ordinaryong Pilipino, ang kayamanan talaga natin at ang lakas, no, ng ating bansa ay nasa kanyang mga tao. Kaya dapat po dun tayo namumuhunan. Sila ang mga pang-araw-araw na bayani. No? Sila nagpupunyagi, hindi na nga sila gaanong umaasa sa gobyerno, gusto na lang nilang magtrabaho. Matagal na silang nagsusumika, pero yung uri ng mga trabaho na meron sa kanila ay hindi talaga nakakasapat dahil nga dun sa istruktura po ng ating ekonomiya. Sila ang mga manggagawa, informal workers, healthcare workers, teachers, and civil servants. Ang masasabi ko, kung gusto nating umunlad ang ating bayan, ay talagang dapat sa kanila po tayo namumuhunan, not elsewhere. Mahalaga ang kalidad ng gobyerno para umunlad sila. Ang pag-unlad nila ay nasa kamay, syempre, ng mga taong nasa gobyerno. Sila ang mag-aalalay at magpapaunlad sa kakayahan ng mga tao na kung saan gusto nating mamuhunan. Kaya kailangan nating bigyan ng prioridad ang social protection and social spending. At napakahalaga po talaga ng budget sapagkat ito ang ating tool, no, for human development. pagpundar tayo sa edukasyon at sa kalusugan ng mga tao. Hindi lang sa pandemic response, kundi sa tuloy-tuloy, no, pagpupundar natin, no, sa edukasyon at kalusugan ng mga mamamayan natin. At sa recovery period, hanapin natin kung ano talaga yung mga industriya na makaka-create ng mga trabaho, na pangmatagalang trabaho para sa kanila. Pangatlo ay mahalaga din ang kalidad ng mga lokal na pamahalaan. At nakita natin ito sa panahon ng pandemya kung gaano kaimportante na matino at maayos at masipag ang ating mga local officials. At sana nga ay mapili natin sila ng mabuti sa eleksyon sa 2022 sapagkat sa kanila nakasalalay ang kaayusan at pangangalaga ng mga tao at mga pamayanan. At espesyal na mamuhunan tayo sa ating kabataan. Kaya napakahalaga ng edukasyon, napakahalaga ng health, no, para sa ating mga kabataan. Mahalaga ang eleksyon sa 2022 at sana makalahok nga ang mga kabataan dito. Mahalaga na nababatay ang ating pagpili hindi lamang sa mga pangako ng mga politiko, kundi tingnan natin mabuti talaga paano sila tumugon sa pandemya. No? Binigyan ba nila ng pangunahing importansya ang kapakanan ng nakakarami, lalong-lalo na ang mga mahihirap. Importante rin na makarating sa kanila ang tamang impormasyon. So, importante na malabanan ang mga fake news, ang mga maling impormasyon sapagkat nakabatay sa impormasyon ang ating mga desisyon, lalong-lalo na kung tayo ay lalahok sa eleksyon sa 2022. Maging mulat din tayo at kumilos upang labanan ang tuloy-tuloy na pagsira sa kapaligiran at kalikasan. Muli, pinaalala ito sa atin. Ano? Ang pandemya ay isang malaking pagpapaalala. No? Hindi na nga ito pagpapaalala, parang isang malaking dagok na para magising tayo, no? Sa pagsira natin sa kapaligiran, sa kalikasan. So nangyari pa nga itong dumping of dolomite dito sa Manila Bay. Nagising na naman tayo na oo nga, panay-panay ang pagmimina ng mga bato sa atin, ano, kung saan ito dinadala na hindi naman talaga kailangan at ini-export pa ang marami dito. Tuloy-tuloy ang pagsira sa ating mga watersheds. No? Paggagawa tayo ng isang dam, no? Merong Kaliwa Dam, isang issue na naman yan. Sisirain ang watershed, sisirain ang kabuhayan ng mga indigenous peoples. Ito ang tuloy-tuloy na mga kwento na sana ay meron tayong magawa para mapigilan. At panghuli, mula sa unang 3 kwento ko tungkol sa mga ordinaryong Pilipino, mahalaga na alalahanin natin na likas sa atin ang isipin ng ating kapwa. Iniisip natin ang marami sa ating mga kababayan na talaga namang kapwa ang iniisip at nasa sa isip nila na sapat na ang meron ako, ang kapwa ko ay nangangailangan din. Ito ang magandang kaisipan na magandang manatili sa ating lahat. Tuloy-tuloy, hindi lamang sa panahon ng paghihirap kagaya ng nararanasan natin ngayon. Panghuli talaga ay isang mula sa Propeta Isias, no, isang pagpapaalala sa atin. Ito ay isang tunay na kwento din, no, mas mahabang kwento na hindi nababago ng kahit na ano. Ang pagmamahal at pagkalinga ng Diyos sa atin. At sabi niya sa atin na bayan niya, no, kasama tayo dito sa mahal niya na Jerusalem, ang bayan niya, na hindi ako tatahimik hanggat hindi dumarating ang inyong tagumpay at katuwiran na parang nagbubukang liwayway. Bagamat kuminsan nararamdaman natin na parang tahimik ang Diyos, hindi talaga siya tahimik. At ito ang totoong kwento ng ating buhay, no? Kung paano tayong minamahal, binabantayan ng ating Panginoon. Hindi siya tatahimik hanggang sa atin ang ating kaligtasan na parang isang nagniningas na sulok. Hindi na tayo tatawaging itinakwil o pinabayaan kahit na kuminsan ganyan ang pakiramdam natin ngayon. No? Hindi ang Diyos ang nagtatakwil sa atin, kuminsan ang ating mga namumuno sa atin. Pero ang Diyos ay kailanman hindi tayo pababayaan. Tayo ay tatawagin niya ang kaligayahan ng Diyos, nalulugod siya sa atin, lalong-lalo na sa mga ordinaryong mga mamamayan na nagpapakita ng pagkalinga sa kanilang kapwa. O ikinasal sa Diyos dahil nalulugod siya sa atin na para bang tayo ay ikakasal sa Kanya. So dito po nagtatapos ang aking pagbabahagi tungkol sa ating pabansang kalagayan. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikinig.
And maraming salamat, Dr. Jing, sa pagbahagi ng inyong kaalaman regarding the national situation and for sharing your time with us this morning. I'd like to invite those here to show your appreciation for Dr. Jing and her presentation through the chat, through the comments on our Facebook live stream, or through the applause reaction, which you can find in the bottom of the screen. Maganda po yung tanong na iniharap ni Dr. Jing sa atin. No? Pagkatapos ng mga kwento na ito, mga kwentong bago, mga kwentong hindi matagal nang hinaharap no ng mga Pilipino, ano na? For the next part of our morning session, we'd like to hear now from Brother Ed Colmenares, who will be sharing how the church might be able to move and respond, guided by the Catholic social teaching. Brother Ed Colmenares is from the Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan. Please direct your attention to his presentation this morning. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome again to Judge Act, the National Situationer, offered by John J. Carroll Institute of Church and Social Issues and Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan. Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Sa puntong ito, narito na tayo sa judge part ng Judge Act at atin nang pagdinilayan kung paano tayo bilang simbahan maaaring tumugon doon sa nakita natin mula sa national situation. At syempre, dala-dala din natin ang ating mga sariling karanasan, lalong-lalo na sa mga nakaengkwentro nating mga dukha at mga naisang tabi ng ating lipunan. At this point in our situationer, as I try to talk about our response as church, I'd like us to be reminded that when we speak of church during these days, we have to first remember that the church is the whole people of God. It's not just the bishops, priests, deacons, clergy, religious sisters, or brothers. Tayo bilang simbahan, kasama na rin dito, tayong lahat. Hindi pa kailangan tayo maordinahan o magkaroon ng vows. Meron na tayong matutugon sa sitwasyon ng ating bayan bilang simbahan. But at certain points here in our presentation, I will also be referring to church hierarchy, to the bishops, to the priests, to the superiors, clergy, sisters, lay leaders of faith-based communities who are watching us this morning. I'd like us to consider the following invitations as we try to respond what it means to respond as church, to make moral choices out of gospel values during these dark, difficult, and troubling times. And let me start with 3 questions. Siyempre, dahil ako ay isang Jesuita, gagamitin ko yung mga tanong na nanggagaling kay San Ignacio de Loyola. And 3 questions that he always asks retreatants in those who go through a 30-day retreat or the spiritual exercises are the following. What have we done for Christ? What are we doing for Christ? What more are we called to do for Christ? At sa puntong ito, kung tayo, naniniwala tayo na nakikita natin ang Diyos at nandoon si Kristo kasama sa ating kapwa, lalong-lalo na doon sa mga naghihikahos, sa mga mahihirap at mga naisang tabi ng lipunan, then that is also the frame for our reflection this morning. I will try to present an overview of what the church has been doing up to this point in responding to the problems brought about by the pandemic, but also to ask perhaps the more daunting and difficult question, what more are we called to do for Christ during these times? Our present situation, what have we done so far? Nakakatuwa nung mga unang buwan ng ECQ dito sa NCR at lalong-lalo sa ating buong bansa ay nauso pareho sa Twitter at sa Facebook yung hashtag Where is the Church? At doon na rin natin nakikita kung paano ba tumugon ng simbahan sa puntong ito ng ating kasaysayan dito sa ating bansa. We've seen that different groups, faith-based groups, parishes, diocese and social action centers, Caritas, faith-based NGOs and CSOs have managed to stage humanitarian aid and relief, providing help not just to the frontliners, not just to the ones who are affected or infected by COVID, but also to the poor people whose jobs have been lost, who are not able to find food for themselves. And also, we've managed to also see ways in which different groups have assisted and housed frontliners, providing them with transportation at siniguro na rin na nadadala sila sa mga ospital kung saan sila patuloy na nagtatrabaho. May mga ilang retreat house, eskwelahan at paaralan na ginamit para dito. Merong mga ibang lugar naman at komunidad na nagbukas ng kanilang mga pinto upang makapagbigay ng tahanan para doon sa mga walang tahanan. Kita natin yan sa Lasal at doon sa Bahay Kalinga ni Father Flavi. But we've also managed to see how different religious institutions have shifted platforms just to ensure that their ministries and services are still given to those who are entrusted to their care. Schools have shifted to online or modular learning. Parishes have managed to stage online masses, just ensuring that the faithful who need to be in their homes still receive spiritual communion and are nourished by the Word of God in the Eucharist. Also, for groups who are able to provide pastoral care and mental health support, they've also managed to shift their counseling services or their pastoral spiritual direction services online. May mga ilang grupo naman na kilala natin, faith-based organizations na tumulong sa mga NGOs at CSOs na maiging binantayan ng gobyerno upang siguraduhin na pagtutuunan nila ng tamang pansin at natutugunan ng maayos ang mga problemang kinakaharap natin itong panahon ng pandemya. Nakakalakas ng loob din makita na ang iba't ibang grupo na patuloy na nagbibigay ng tulong sa mga nangangailangan kahit na sila na rin mismo ay kinakapos na. Alam naman natin lahat tayo ay apektado dahil sa pandemyang ito. Pero may mga ilan tayong mga kababayan na mas higit na nararamdaman ang epekto nito. Some religious institutions, parishes, schools, retreat houses, communities have had to make tough decisions during this time as they themselves were also hit by the pandemic. Yet in spite of these difficulties, it is very consoling to see how they've actually still managed to figure out ways of providing continuity and sustainability of their operations, but making sure that they don't need to trade that off by ensuring jobs for those who badly need it in their operations. And so these are actually some of the concerns, the anxieties, and the long-standing problems that have surfaced during this time of pandemic. Atin nang natanto na mga problemang umusbong nitong pandemya ay hindi mga bagong problema ng ating lipunan. Matagal na ang namumroblema sa ating lipunan ang mga magsasaka, mga guro, mga coconut farmers, fisher folk, lalong-lalo na ang ating mga health workers. We slowly realized during this time of pandemic that the problems that have surfaced are long-standing problems of our country. The pandemic just revealed the weakness of our public health, economic, transportation, and education system, and so many more. And yet, these problems have continued to exist because there has also been a long-standing culture of corruption, of nepotism, of opportunism, of a deafness to the plight of the poor and the disadvantaged. And when it comes to this, as church, we cannot and we should not just be fence sitters. It cannot be now just all about ensuring our own survival. We have to realize that the survival of the poor, of our nation, of the earth, is deeply linked to our very own survival and our very own liberation as well. Slowly and surely, we need to discern and map out courses in action. Sinasabi kong slowly and surely kasi makikita natin at nakita na natin kung gaano kasalimuot ang mga problemang ito. Lumabas nga lang, umusbong sila dahil sa pandemya, pero alam na nga natin na matagal ng problema ito at mahirap lutasan. But quickly and urgently, we need to discern and map out also courses of action and heed the call of Christ in our poor and suffering brethren. That is why it is of utmost importance for us Christians to ask, what more am I called to do? What more are we called to do? Alam ko ang dami na nating pinoproblema. Some of us may already be going through difficult times internally and even as we feel them externally. Juggling all these concerns can make us anxious and may even make the discernment question, what more are we called to do, even more daunting. And yet at this point, brothers and sisters, I ask that maybe we can ask the Lord for the grace of a discerning and of a courageous heart during these times. Several groups of lay people, leaders of religious congregations, and members of the diocesan clergy have already expressed a desire and a felt need to do more than just relief, to do more than just provide life. While these are and they provide immediate aid, we know that very well. We cannot do away with them. We also have to engage and face the problem head on, as they are present in structures of our society. And so we have to ask that as we look at these structures and criticize them and reflect on them, how may we respond as church? Minsan yung ilan sa atin takot tingnan ng mga political structures, but actually, when we look at our Christian mission, especially in terms of the eyes of reconciliation and justice, we have to look at it also in terms of political commitment. John Paul II once wrote in Evangelium Vitae that political commitment is one way where we can share in Christ's mission. Sinasabi din ng ating magisterium, at ilang beses na rin natin itong narinig sa ating Santo Papa ngayon, si Papa Francisco, na politics is the highest form of charity because it serves the common good. But we have to note that when we say of political commitment here, it's not just about serving in public office. Siguro may mga ilan sa mga laiko sa grupong ito ngayon na palagay nila ay tinatawag sila ng Panginoon na magsilbi sa publiko bilang isang elected official. Pwede yon. Pero syempre tayong mga reliyoso, yung mga madre, pare, mga obispo, hindi yon pwede sa atin. Pero bahagi ng ating political commitment ay siguraduhin tayo ay nagsasalita, lalong-lalo na para dun sa mga hindi nakapagsalita pag meron ng mga problema sa lipunan na umuusbong at sila na yung naaapektuhan. As companions in mission of reconciliation and justice, I would like to offer two insights that I have culled from conversations over the past few months. A lot of times we've always been asked, how can we respond as church? And this is not the first time I'm trying to answer these questions. I've also asked this question several times over and over. And what I've picked up from a lot of the answers, from a lot of the prayers also that have been shared in reflections, is that our task is that of healing and uniting. Recall the task of the prophets, and that's what always comes to mind. While the prophets called out the injustices of their time, their language was not just about criticism and putting down the injustices and those who are committing them. The language of the prophets was also filled with much hope. They reminded Israel of the kind of people that they could be, the kind of people that God envisioned them to be. Because the injustices that they saw were always violations of the commandments. And our faith tells us that the covenant that God has given, even as early as the Old Testament, is God's vision of our humanity, which we see more clearly in Jesus Christ. As church, we are called to become agents of healing and reflection. Hindi tayo dapat nahihimasok sa problema ng ating lipunan at ng gobyerno. I'm sure we've heard that already before, especially from those who are misguided in their belief that our faith prohibits us from speaking up on public matters. Just keep quiet and cooperate, some would say. But being agents of healing and reconciliation does not preclude the possibility of speaking truth to power. Because we are called to be healers, we cannot just simply patch up wounds of discrimination, of discord, of disease, of injustice, and of poverty. We need to have a diagnosis. We need to figure out what's the virus, what's the bacterial infection, what's the cause of this disease. As agents of unity and reconciliation, we cannot just say, let's all come together. No. Part of the process is also speaking up against that which divides as a nation. We have to continue to recognize the divide. And that is one thing that we need to consider also today. There is continued marginalization in our country. We need to be mindful also during the past few years how this marginalization has also made our country and society more polarized. The poor versus the rich, yung mga edukado at hindi mga edukado, yung mga matitino at yung mga bastos, mga dilawan, mga DDS, may ganung pagkahati-hati sa ating lipunan. At ang nakakabahala, ang nakakadismaya, kasi kung sino man yung mga taong nangako na sila yung mag-aayos ng paghahati-hati na ito, ng mga hidwaang ito, sila rin ang ginagamit ito para siguraduhing manatili sila sa kapangyarihan. Those who promise to solve and heal these divisions galvanize them, such that to the point that they've even turned our fellow countrymen into our own enemies. And so, my dear friends, part of the job of being uniters, reconcilers, is to combat also the massive disinformation and revisionist campaigns. Even just in your social media posts or your groups, if you can tell people that this is fake news, that this news item or this person should not be trusted when he's blurting out something, that's already part. We cannot just in good conscience simply stay silent and let the lies rule the land, because our silence may actually be a form of cooperation already with the evil one. We have to speak truth when we are faced by lies. We have to demand accountability on authentic service when we are faced by lousy excuses and glaring opportunism in our country. It is our moral duty. We cannot just say that we are doing the good and avoiding evil, but if we see evil already spreading and not doing something about it, we have become complicit to this job. We deserve a better government, better leaders, and better policies, especially those that favor the poor and the marginalized in our country. If what is already being done denigrates human dignity in this preferential option, as Christians, as Catholics, devout if we really are, we already have to step in. And one other way we can do this is to continue to build communities of discernment. I know all of you are representing various communities already, and I'm sure in your respective communities you've heard the word discernment several times. But here I would like us to be reminded of several things about it. Discernment is always an ongoing process. Isa itong patuloy na proseso ng engagement, analysis, pagdarasal, pagninilay-nilay, at pagtugon. If one of these things are missing in the process of discernment, we have simply watered down such a wonderful tool that has been handed on to us to be able to read the signs of the times and respond to God's will in the here and now. Mahalagang nagsisimula palagi ang ating pagninilay, pangingilati sa isang enkwentro, sa mga dukha at sa mga naisang tabi ng lipunan. At pansinin na kasunod nito ang pagdarasal, pagpaplano, pagninilay-nilay, at pagtugon. And if we are always looking for God, and our faith tells us that God is most present with the victims of injustice and poverty, I think we already know where we need to start. Isa rin itong pinaalala sa atin noong inilabas ang call to prayer and action mula sa CBCP. Look and hear the cries of the victims of injustice and those who are suffering during this time. This opens up our horizons, and hopefully we act on their behalf. We may easily also be overwhelmed with the problems of poverty, corruption, and the continuous disenfranchisement. At kung iisipin natin to at poproblemahin natin to palagi, nakakalula. That is why I ask and urge those who are present here to continue to build or rebuild communities of discernment. We cannot just simply ask what is going on now, what do we need to do now, kailangan lang natin magpakain, magbigay ng gamot dito. No, that is not enough. We have to also ask the difficult questions. Why does this continue to happen? And how can our response be more systematic and organized? That is why we must discern immediate responses while also taking a systemic and long-term view. At mga kapatid, during these troubling times, when the enemy wants to make us think that we are alone, that we are helpless, that we should just wait things out, all the more we should build communities. To leaders of religious communities who are here, or even perhaps to the more proactive members, you may want to talk to your leaders and superiors. Please organize, empower, inform, and sustain these communities of discernment. Let us continue to build informed and discerning communities. Map out how we will move things. Map out your networks. Map out your skills and talents in your communities. They are very important during these dark, troubling, and confusing times. And notice that as soon as you start discerning these things, how the mood will change. Because then, perhaps from a feeling of helplessness and loneliness, they get a sense that something better can be done. Lalong-lalo na kung alam mong may kasama ka at pinoproblema din palang pinoproblema mo, nakakagaan yun sa loob. At nakakapagbigay ng lakas upang patuloy na tugunan ang ating problema. Build ties with other groups. Make networks. That's why we're here and that's why we invite you. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Groups like us in Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan and the John J. Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues can help you with materials and processes, while we will rely on you, on your knowledge of the immediate concerns of vulnerable communities in your apostolates and in your own areas. But also, baka gusto nyo rin i-refer nyo kami ng ICSI at ng SLB sa mga iba't ibang community at social action centers na alam ninyo. At malay mo sa ating sabay-sabay na pagtugon nito ay makakatulong tayo sa isa't isa. After this national situation, or some of you might even want us to follow on Facebook or even on our Twitter handles so that we can share with you our materials and resources. But also, as we discern how we can come together and build a better future, especially for the youth of our nation, parang kanino ba naman natin ito ay ginagawa? Let us work with them. Let us work with you. Youth pa rin naman ako. But we really appreciate it when people are patiently teaching us, but are also willing to hear us out. May we also hear out then, not just the youth, but also the cries and the dreams of our poor and disenfranchised countrymen. Lastly, as we build and rebuild our discerning communities, let us not forget to let our communities be inspired by God's Word. Because at the end of the day, that is what sets us apart from other political groups or humanitarian associations. If we reflect on what is going on right now with God's Word assures us that He will transform the chaos of our lives into order, that it will pierce through the darkness of these times by the light that it brings, through our hearts, through our actions, through our minds and plans and ideas. May we make choices then that are not simply just born out of our political opinions. Or perhaps we may be asked to let go of our political opinions, especially when our choices may not be in sync with the values of the gospel of our faith. And we have to remember that the gospel was good news that the Lord proclaimed to the Israelites, but most especially to the Israelites who were poor, left out, and marginalized. And so we have to ask ourselves then, how can our communities better proclaim this gospel? Can your choices, can your views and opinions of the politics of our land continually reflect the gospel of our faith? And how can we act on them? I hope this was helpful, and I hope to hear from you guys, from your communities later on, as we also journey with you in your process of discernment and building a better future for our country. Thank you very much.
Marami pong salamat, Bro Ed, for sharing your thoughts and your time with us this morning. Again, for those joining us online, you can show your appreciation for Brother Ed through the applause command in the reactions below, through our chat box, or through the comments on the Facebook live stream. Again, all of the videos presented and this entire session can be revisited on the Facebook pages of the Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan and the John Jack Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues on Facebook after this morning's event. They will be saved there as permanent videos on those respective Facebook pages. After hearing from both Dr. Jing and Brother Ed, we now move on to hearing from two very special people who are joining us this morning, two reactors who will be sharing their thoughts and their stake in the national situation and the church as it faces this call and invitation to respond. Our two reactors are Father Danny Pilario and Miss Jo Arceo. Father Danny is from the Congregation of Mission and is currently the Dean of the St. Vincent School of Theology. He's the founding member and former president of Dakateo, or the Catholic Theological Society of the Philippines. Bringing in an alternative perspective is Ms. Jo Arceo, a lecturer at the Ateneo de Manila University's Department of Theology and moderator and advisor to the Ateneo Student Catholic Action Group. She's also a member of the young faith community called the Prophet Project. I'd like to first invite Father Danny to please share his thoughts with us this morning. So Father Danny, the screen is now yours.
Maraming salamat. Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate the John J. Carroll Institute for this comprehensive research and assessment sa panahong ito na mahirap mag-research. This is a very great accomplishment. Salamat din kay Jing Karaos for the great summary. Mahirap i-summarize yung napakaraming research in 30 minutes. And for Brother Ed for asking the question, what do we need to do? My reaction is a comment on three areas that crisscrossed several categories in the report. I have written this in order not to go beyond my allotted time. And my objective is to use one particular social event to serve as a window to a larger whole. Tatlong bagay ang nais kong pag-usapan na maging window sa pangyayari ng karamihan sa lipunan. Una ang ayuda, ikalawa ang tukhang, at ikatlo yung pagsasaka. Lahat ng itong tatlo ay nandoon sa report ng John Carroll Institute. First, ang ayuda. No? The report says that 5 million families receive 8,000 at the first tranche, 8,000 pesos, and there are supposed to be third and second tranches. There were also supposed to be food subsidies from DSWD, whose main office ironically closed shop at the start of the pandemic. I was thinking who's going to distribute that. But that's on the report. But how does it really look on the ground? Being a worker in Payatas for the last 18 years, I know what's going on in the ayuda on the ground. The first window to something to Duterte's governance is the list of beneficiaries, which already Jing has mentioned. Where does that list come from? From NCSO? The last census was done 5 years ago. And you know how people multiply, no? Especially in the urban areas. From the barangay, that is the list of political allies for election purposes. Yun yung ginagapang bago mag-election. From the purok leader, that is hastily done list of kamag-anak and kumaris and kumpares, leaving many on the sides. So what are its consequences? The list, consequences of the list. You see long queues at the barangay hall under the rain or noonday sun up to the wee hours of the night. And the homeless indigenous peoples, the beggars, whose names do not appear on the barangay list, go home with nothing. Now, my point is simple. The list is a window to the bureaucratic, impersonal approach to government service that does not value the human person as person. It is a window not just of the Duterte administration, but to the present populist and democratic social arrangements worldwide. While big neoliberal institutions fail their citizens, what comes to the fore during the pandemic are autonomous self-organized groups, not bureaucratic lists. These local and personal networks counter hegemonic solidarities of care and mutual support are the ones which has saved us during the pandemic. What comes to my mind now is a courageous group of 50 BEC women leaders in Payatas, of whom we are working with, who have risked their lives, safety, and safety to distribute rice, pandesal, milk, and whatever they have to their neighbors every day for the past 6 months since the lockdown. Because they live their lives there in those spaces, these mothers know sinong nawawala ng trabaho, sino ang pinaka-vulnerable, at sino ang nangangailangan ng pagkain ngayon. Sa isang meeting, and we meet every Sunday to assess the relief work, I ask a guide question in this session. I ask, after 3 months with all the risks of being contaminated, why are you still here? What made you stay? Isang nanay, of course, they went into sharing, and one mother summarized her group's sentiments. Sabi niya, what made us stay? It is Jesus' command to feed the hungry. Or how can we continue to live when people are dying? Eh, syempre, Tagalog po yun. In English ko na. For me, these mothers provide a stinging critique to incompetent and corrupt government. Critique even to the NGOs who have become bureaucratic themselves, as well as a critique to the complacent church people paralyzed by fear and retreated to the safety of their homes during the pandemic. Here in Payatas, lay-centered and women-led groups, motivated by their faith alone in the Jesus who feeds the poor, incarnates what CST has only theorized and written in text. The principles of participation, subsidiarity, and solidarity in all its emotional nearness, felt caring, and concreteness of everyday action. Ang ikalawang image po ay ang tukhang, which is the window to the rule of impunity of the Duterte administration. The war on drugs, which started 4 years ago, still continued during the pandemic. Human Rights Watch reported 50% increase in EGK during police operations, not counting the riding in tandems. In Payatas alone, we had 3 to 4 cases, and there are several others whom we have not yet documented because of the lockdown. For me, I chose the war on drugs because it is a window to the rule of impunity and disregard for human lives and human rights in the whole of the Duterte administration. The politics of fear that it has implemented from June 30, 2016 until today tells us we are on the state of war. Before it was drugs, now it was coronavirus. Obey or you will die. This militarized approach to the pandemic is sadly mimicked in our offices, in our churches, and in our homes. May mga maliliit na rin na mga Duterte sa mga bahay at simbahan natin. And the IATF is alarmed with the rising mental health issues, and they're asking the help from the church, but almost without knowing that their approach reinforces this in our homes and in our minds. This impunity for me leads to what I call the inversions of the Duterte administration. They do violence to the protesters who are hungry at San Roque, but absolve the abuses of Sinas, Roque, and Duque. They absolve Pemberton, but keep Laila de Lima in prison. They close ABS-CBN, but eagerly welcome Dito. It is the same impunity logic from the start. They kill the poor drug user, but leave Peter Lim and other drug lords go scot-free. While the gospel inversions, Luke is famous for this, while the gospel inversions favor the weak, the 30 inversions favor the oligarchs and the powerful, notwithstanding his protestations to the contrary. And all this and that's the tragedy of it, are happening during the pandemic when people are dying. Pope Francis reminds us that the pandemic should not be used as an excuse not to respect human dignity, which is the cornerstone of and principle of his CST. To quote, he says, while we work for the cure of a virus that affects everyone without distinction, faith urges us to work seriously and actively to fight indifference in the face of violations of human dignity. Something which Duterte is determined not to listen, but to neglect with or without the virus. My last point is ang pagsasaka at ang pagkalinga, which is our window of hope. The only bright spot in the report and during the pandemic is the growth of agriculture, the report says. The once forgotten farmer, doubly marginalized by land conversion and rice tariffication, among others, became our only source of salvation. When we are enamored with large cities, big malls, giant businesses, it only takes COVID-19 to deconstruct that and tell us that small is in fact beautiful. This is also the title of a small book by Schumacher, which I have read long time ago. Small is beautiful. The small talipapa in the corner, the small grocery nearby, the small community which is self-sustaining, and the personal relations and care in these small communities serve as our window of hope in the midst of the pandemic. Then I am back to where I started. The paradigm of care or pagkalinga as an antidote to fear. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis actually speaks less of the theology of stewardship in relation to creation and talks only 2 times in the whole document, and talks more of the paradigm of care in our relationship, not only with others, but with nature. Its subtitle of Laudato Si affirms this: care for our common home. Let me end and let me go back to the women leaders of Payatas. Even as they were made to scavenge the waste of capital in order to survive, to quote the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, and having been turned into wastes of capitals themselves, these women scavengers are now turning the tables on global capitalism and start producing their own vegetables, their own food, their own organic farms in the meager land which they ironically borrowed. 10 communities, 15 communities of mothers in Payatas are turning into urban gardening and producing their own vegetables and food. They wake up every morning and work and share their stories in front of their growing veggies. And you can only imagine the hope and beauty, the caring and joy that this brings to us. Maraming salamat at magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.
Maraming salamat, Father Danny. Thank you for sharing that with us and sharing your thoughts and experiences with us here this morning. Again, para sa lahat, feel free to show your gratitude and appreciation dun sa ating chat, or you can message here in our chat or leave your comments on our Facebook live stream comment boxes. Right now, we turn our attention to our second reactor. So Father Danny shared his experiences, and now we hear from the perspectives of another person who is also committed very much so to the mission of the church. We now draw our attention to Ms. Jo Arceo for her reaction to the National Situationer presentation.
Magandang araw po sa lahat. Nagpapasalamat po akong maanyayahan na maging bahagi ng espasyong ito. Bagamat limitado ang aking kaalaman at partisipasyon sa kabuoang misyon ng simbahan, ikinagagalak ko pong maging kinatawan ng boses ng kabataan at ng laiko sa pagpupulong na ito. Bilang isang Kristiyanong laiko at babae, naging malaking bahagi ng aking espiritualidad at kamalayang Katoliko ang Catholic social teachings. Para sa isang katulad ko po na hindi lumaki sa mga private Catholic schools at hindi naman gaanong kaaktibo ang pamilya sa simbahan. Namulat ako sa aking relasyon sa Diyos nung nagsimula akong mamulat sa mga realidad at sugat ng ginagalawan kong lipunan. Sa tuwing nag-i-immersion kami ng mga kasamahan ko nung college sa ATSCA, sa mga kaibigan naming nakatira sa urban poor communities, sa tuwing napag-uusapan ang kalagayan ng mga naargabyadong magsasaka sa Mindanao, sa tuwing nag-oorganisa at nakikibahagi kami sa mga prayer vigil at protest para sa iba't ibang marginalisadong sektor, nabubuo sa akin ang katanungan. Bakit may mga taong naisasangkabi at inaagawan ng kayamanan sa isang lipunang may iilan lamang ang nakikinabang? Alam kong tanong din ito ng karamihan sa mga kabataang dinatnan na ang mundo na puno ng sugat, puno ng karahasan at di pagkakapantay-pantay. Makikita natin na napakarami ng kabataan ng kumikilos, nag-oorganisa kasama ang mga kaibigan para subukang ayusin ang mga kabaluktutan na naipasa sa amin ng mga naunang henerasyon. Kasama dito ang aming samahan sa Prophet Project PH na isang grupo ng mga young professionals na binubuklod ng pananampalatayang nakaangkla sa prophetic at liberationist ministry ni Jesus. Kasama rin dito ang Ateneo Student Catholic Action na isang grupo naman ng mga college students sa Ateneo na sinusubukang makilala ang mukha ng Diyos sa mukha ng aming mga kapatid sa area at mga malalawak na social issues. Napakarami pang ibang grupo. Isang tingin lamang sa aming mga social media at kwentuhan kapag nagkakatipon-tipon, makikitang samot-saring hinagpis at tanong. Hindi totoong bulag ang mga kabataan. Hindi lamang namin alam kung saan magsisimula. Kung kaya't napakalaking bagay ang puwang na maibabahagi ng simbahan para magabayan ang aming pagkilos, ang aming mga susunod na hakbang. Saksi ako sa kakayahan ng Catholic social teachings na maabot ang kabataang malayo sa lengguwahe at kultura ng tradisyonal na simbahan. Dito kung saan naisasabuhay ang koneksyon ng pananampalataya at ang ating moral na obligasyon sa ating kapwa at lipunan, maipapakilala ng simbahan ang tunay na mukha ni Jesus. Hindi sa striktong tradisyon o dogma o hindi maabot na konsepto ng teolohiya na aakit ang kabataang Pilipino, kundi sa ehemplo na ipinapakita at isinasabuhay ng aming simbahan. Natutunan ko sa aking buhay espiritualidad na kung babalikan ang kaibuturan ng pagiging isang tunay na Kristiyano, laging uuwi ito sa panawagan na makisangkot sa pag-atim sa hustisya at proteksyon ng dignidad ng kapwa-tao. At the heart of our faith, if it is to be lived well, is to advocate for social justice. Hiling ng kabataang Pilipino na magkaroon ng patutunguhan ng aming mga kilos, lakas, creativity, at kaalaman. Napakarami pa naming kayang ibahagi sa bansang ito. Napakarami pa naming kayang ipakilala na mukha ng Diyos na ikalalago ng simbahang Katoliko. Ngunit hindi namin alam kung paano at saan papasok. Maaring maging tulay ang Catholic social teachings upang magkaroon ng isang agenda ang simbahan at ang kabataan. When we make sense of our reality through the lens of our faith, from the lens of what we believe in, our activism becomes a little bit more hopeful. Kayang punan ng pananampalataya ang imahinasyon at lengguwahe namin upang magkabuklod-buklod. Hindi lamang mauuwi sa pagod, galit at hinanakit, ang pakikipaglaban upang ayusin ang mundong dinatnan namin. Bagkus ay magkakaroon ito ng muka na tumatawag sa amin upang magmahal. Dahil nakikita namin ang mukha ng Diyos sa bawat tao at nilalang, nagiging mas makabuluhan ang pakikibaka. Kalakip ng mensaheng ito ang panawagan na makita ang kabataan bilang kaakibat ng simbahan sa kagustuhang itaguyod ang kaharian ng Diyos sa kasalukuyan. Pagtulungan po nating tugunan ang panawagan ng panahon natin ngayon. Tanungin natin ang mga kabataan sa ating mga parish kung ano ang mga isyong tumatama sa kanila. Yung ikinalulungkot nila, yung ikinagagalit nila, yung ikinatutuwa nila. Marahil ito ang signs of the times. Marahil dito nagpapakilalang muli ang Diyos. Bigyan natin sila ng espasyo upang magtanong. Dahil kasabay ng pagtatanong ay pagkilala sa pagkabagabag. At mula sa pagkabagabag ay uusbong ang pagkilos. Napakaraming inalahad sa atin ng Diyos na mga kasangkapan upang tulungan tayo sa ating pagtugon. Hinahamon tayo ng panahon na maging creative. Hayaan natin ang kabataan ang magbukas ng mga nakapinid na bintana at pagpapasok sa sariwang hangin sa ating mahal na simbahan. Maraming salamat po at pagpapala sa lahat.
Maraming salamat, Joe, sa pagbahagi. Thank you for also being an inspiration for other young people who continue to believe and commit to the mission of justice and to the mission of the church. We'd like to thank both our reactors and our speakers earlier for all that they've shared with us this morning, as these will be valuable insights that we can later reflect and converse upon as we begin our spiritual conversations for this morning. And para po sa lahat, no, yung daloy ng ating umagang ito ay pagkatapos pakinggan ng ating mga tagapabahagi, we will now be entering into a prayerful and spiritual conversation with one another. The See Judge Act hopes to create spaces where people can learn from one another, can hear from each other's perspectives, and create a deeper understanding of the situation we find ourselves in. I'd like to ask if the screen with the instructions can be flashed. All right. Para din po sa mga nakikinig through our Facebook live stream, we also invite you to engage in these spiritual conversations in your own time and in your own capacity. No? Yung ganitong klaseng activity ay pwedeng gawin sa inyong mga congregation o community with as many number of people as you want, provided that all are able to speak and all are actively listening. Later, we will be breaking out into smaller groups, and we'd like to invite all of our participants to take some time to silently reflect and contemplate upon the presentations and reactions shared by Dr. Jing, Brother Ed, Father Danny, and Joe. Take note of the moments that deeply affected you and brought out a strong reaction from you. For our spiritual conversation, there will be 3 rounds of sharing over 20 minutes. For each round, once more, we ask that all respectfully listen to one another and allow them to share uninterruptedly, while those sharing are asked to be mindful of the time so that everyone is given a chance to speak. For those who will be part of the breakout rooms, may papakita naman po ang timer doon sa ating breakout sessions. For the first round of sharing for our spiritual conversations regarding the national situation, we ask you to take time to individually share your responses to the guide questions that will be shared later. Again, listen carefully and intentionally to one another. After everyone has shared, you can begin the second round of spiritual conversations by sharing your responses to one another's points. You can affirm points that are shared. You can add on to points that resonated with you, or you can provide alternative perspectives. Our objective for this conversation is not to prove who is right, but to continue learning together and deepening our prayerful conversation. Muli, please make sure that all are given a chance to take part in the conversation. Once completed, the group returns to sacred listening, where each individual will be able to share their personal fruits of grace from the spiritual conversation. Mga natutunan, mga bagong kinikilalang perspektibo, and we're able to listen to one another and recognize this depth. Listen in appreciation of the movement of the Spirit, and we end the conversation in silence and prayer. Our guide questions for the breakout session as presented are three very simple guides. Una, what were my feelings as I listened to the presentation? And what do these feelings tell me about myself or about where God is inviting me now? So ano po ang ating naramdaman habang pinapakinggan ang mga ibinahaging kwento? Second, what discourages me and what gives me hope about our national situation? And lastly, how can we respond as a community of faith? What is my role as a Catholic, a Christian, and a believer? Again, these are guide questions, but we ask you to share what it is that you feel is moving and resonating with you from the previous conversations. In response to the question in the chat, there will be a return to the plenary group so that we can formally close off the conversation. May ibibigay ding link sa isang feedback form na pwedeng gamitin ng ating mga nakikinig sa Facebook live stream to share with us their own thoughts. Right? I think we are ready. Some of our speakers and presenters might be joining your breakout session. Please use this instead as a time to involve each other in the spiritual conversation rather than a one-on-one question and answer po. So, ayun lang po. I think we will be ready to have the breakout session soon. But in the meantime, I invite everyone to silently reflect on the guide questions presented on the screen until the breakout rooms are set up.
The Jesuit Hour. Get to know the Jesuits. Discover their spirituality, their history, their ministries. The Jesuit Hour. Anything Jesuit, everything Jesuit. The Jesuit Hour.